In the last year and a half, we Americans have learned a lot about heroes. Some are famous, most are not. But what they all have in common is the ability to perform great deeds of courage at the most unexpected times. Exactly 20 years ago, 4 people came together out of sheer panic to create something they thought would be needed for months, maybe a year, but certainly not decades. I'm Tom Hanks. Welcome to Heroes 20 Years with AIDS Project Los Angeles. Over the past 2 decades, AIDS has permeated our consciousness. It has altered so much for so many. But for those 20 years, there has been a beacon of light here in the Southland for those at risk, APLA.
In 1982, when we founded APLA, no one did know anything. And there was a panic which started slowly, but zoomed very, very quickly as more and more people started to be ill, and as more and more folks around those people who were ill were scared and were taking steps back. So there became a huge public panic.
This disease was mushrooming so that every day there were more and more cases, and the people were sick, really sick.
And most of them died within a matter of a few months. So there was panic. There was panic throughout the gay community and throughout all of the communities.
At that time, there had been 300 cases of this rare form of pneumonia. 100 people had died. We wanted to hear from people at the Centers for Disease Control and those who were treating patients to find out what was happening.
This town became panic-stricken, and all the media, as they're wont to do, were running up to actors on the street saying, "Are you ever going to kiss anybody again?" and all this craziness.
People I know started to get sick, and then I became terrified, and I just got involved.
HIV wasn't identified as the virus at that point. Nobody knew what that was yet. We just knew it was AIDS.
There was no test. And since we didn't know how it was transmitted, we didn't know what to tell people not to do.
We knew that it couldn't be just a gay disease because diseases don't do that. So we started to sort of form an organization.
AIDS Project Los Angeles, like so many organizations, started in the kitchen by a couple of people who, as far as they knew, were not infected, but saw there was a problem and had to do something about it. And they did something about it.
Nancy's job, and the only job she ever wanted, was to take care of people who were sick. And before we had an office, that happened at her home. Or a little bit later, when people were literally dying, she was at bedsides. It was just all about love for Nancy, taking care of people and making sure that they had the support that they needed and someplace to go.
People wanted information. They wanted to know why this was happening, and we simply didn't have the information. We could only tell them what the symptoms were, what kinds of things were happening.
And we knew that we had to come forward and do what we could to get people not only medical services and into the right hands, but oftentimes food, a place to stay.
We also had to develop informational materials. So we started writing brochures. We wrote an original brochure, the very first brochure that was ever written on AIDS, and we took it to Dr. Michael Gottlieb to edit it. We distributed it to all of the medical societies throughout the United States, and it became the first piece of AIDS literature ever. A matter of a few months later, we translated that to Spanish.
Hollywood's response was, of course, first complete terror, not knowing what it was. And then once they realized that the people who they worked with every day were dying, getting sick and leaving, they began rallying.
I was very concerned that there not be a backlash against our gay community and that it be treated as a disease and not a social issue.
People wouldn't come into our office to interview us. News media would have to meet us outside. Postmen wouldn't deliver mail.
I know at that time, a lot of my PR people, my agents, everybody was saying, "Don't touch this, it's too controversial, go do something where you can hug kids," and people love that. And I'm saying, yeah, but they can get any celebrity to go hug kids. This one, I felt it needed me, that there was something I could bring to the table that perhaps other people, especially at that time, couldn't.
We thought that we were just going to be a group of volunteers to try to help out on a hotline and provide information.
If people were scared and didn't know what was happening and their doctor didn't know what was happening, they have a place to call where we could give them some support.
We get a lot of calls from people that have recently been diagnosed with ARC or AIDS, or they've lost their home, they've been thrown out of their home, they've been abandoned by their family and friends.
In order to pay for the telephones and to pay the rent for the building that we were in and pay for the materials, we had to do fundraising. So Max Drew headed up that part of it. Basically begging for money is where we started.
And in the beginning, nobody would fund this disease. I mean, it was not a disease you could call up a corporation or even get money from private individuals. It was very, very difficult. There was so much stigma associated with it. Nobody would even talk to us.
This is something the government should have been doing. But thank goodness that since the government wasn't doing all it needed to do, we had groups like AIDS Project LA to pick up the slack.
We were the only ones that at that time had lists of, for example, physicians that would work with people with AIDS, dentists that would work with people. We even had to find lists of funeral directors.
It was a building where a person with AIDS or HIV positive could come and get everything they needed, from medical care to food to counseling to buddy programs to everything they needed.
And we've done, I think, a fairly good job, given the fact that it's an almost impossible job. It's not only the person that walks in the door that needs help, it's the person who might walk in the door next year.
For years, the Hollywood community has responded to cries for help, from war bonds in the World Wars to September 11th. 20 years ago, when AIDS Project Los Angeles was looking for light in the darkness, people behind the scenes and in front of the cameras rallied. Here's Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Who among us doesn't have friends and family and colleagues, that have been hit hard and early?
There were so many people who had so many friends who were dying, and so it couldn't be denied. I mean, the early people, the people that got involved in the very beginning, or the people that first supported APLA were people like Joan Rivers, Bette Midler, Morgan Fairchild. Those were three names that were always there. And obviously Elizabeth Taylor, clearly because they were personally affected.
We had Rock Hudson, Magic Johnson, Elizabeth Glaser, and others who put a human face to the AIDS epidemic.
Certainly among, I think, the hardest and most tragic for me was Howard Ashman, extraordinary talent, and a partner for me. There's probably no one I learned more from about how to make an animated movie. And with that just became great friends. And to live through the loss of Howard was just as terrible as anything that's happened to me.
I think of someone like Elizabeth Taylor, who could get to President Reagan and explain to him how this was an issue he had to confront.
I got involved with APLA because people that meant so much to me, I cared so much about, were taken from me by AIDS. And APLA and all of the wonderful things that I think the organization has had as its ambition and its goals, and ultimately I think much of which it's achieved, made me feel like I could help, that I could make some difference in the quality of life for those who had to wake up every day and face death.
Here in LA, 1 in 5 gay men under the age of 25 is HIV positive. That's 20%. That's a whole new generation. Protect yourself, get tested, and stay healthy.
Heroes, 20 years with AIDS Project Los Angeles, will return. "20 years ago, on December 7th, the first AIDS fundraiser was held in Los Angeles. It was a Christmas party and raised $7,000. Since then, events have been key to raising both awareness and cash for APLA, AIDS walks, dance-a-thons, marathons, fashion events, summer concerts and parties, commitment to life. Here's Bruce Vilanch.
I have written all 11, 12, 14, 19, 11 commitment to life starting with the Betty Ford one. And then once Elizabeth Taylor came in and announced that this was her cause, she picked up the phone and started calling people. And people, you know, everybody takes her call. I mean, even the Pope will take her call, if just to discuss jewelry.
What she brought to it is something that I don't know that anybody else could have brought to it. I mean, she has such a voice, and she influences so many people, and she's so passionate about this.
Everybody's done it. I mean, it became one of the big events of the show business year, which was bizarre because at the beginning, you couldn't get anybody to do an AIDS fundraiser. It was a pariah disease. Nobody wanted to be associated with it. Eventually, we moved to the Universal Amphitheater when it was time to honor Bette Midler.
Truly, it is my most baffling triumph since I won Miss Jewish Teenage Hawaii.
We had Madonna twice. They've all been on it, and everybody has been pretty well behaved. Even Dennis Rodman. He showed up and he got into drag, which I gather was not the first time he had done that. He seemed to get into drag very quickly. It didn't take him nearly as long as it took Raquel Welch, but the result wasn't the same.
Like the dress? I borrowed it from RuPaul.
They think I'm Carol Channing. Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm afraid I'm here under false pretenses. I came because they told me I could debate gun control with Tom Selleck. Actually, I am here to welcome you to Commitment to Life 11 for people who are in the grip of the struggle with AIDS.
Let's talk about sex. Yo, let's talk about AIDS. To the uninformed, you think you can't get it? Well, you're dead wrong.
Doctor's pills give you brand new wills, and the pills bury you like an avalanche. Losing everything, it's like the sun going down on me. I can't find the right romantic line. See me once, see the way I feel.
It's nice to be recognized with my clothes on for a change. You're gonna have to give me a minute to kind of compose myself after being that close to Brendan Fraser.
In her dreams, every little girl looks like Barbie. But in reality, every little girl looks like me.
That was the year they were giving an award to the woman who ran Mattel, who made Barbies. And Roseanne came out and said,
So I don't know if you remember when you got your first Barbie, and you boys in the balcony, I'm talking to you.
If anybody ever wanted to torture Saddam Hussein, they should make him dance in a beaded gown for about an hour. Of course, we don't know that he doesn't do that already, now do we?
One year we were playing Guess the Jackson. Janet Jackson was wearing a hat. She didn't sing, and she wore a hat. Is that LaToya sneaking in there?
I will never stop. All that I can possibly do to help fight this disease, and thank you, APLA, and the Commitment to Life.
She was doing a number from Victor Victoria, looking like a very fey man, and with red hair, and from a distance it was almost like David Bowie had dropped in. And so there are a lot of people saying, geez, that guy looks like Julie Andrews.
Jazz.
You start with an idea with Robin, and then you just kind of toss it back and forth, and then he puts it all into that kind of Cuisinart that substitutes for his head.
My mother took me to see Bette Midler. Thank you. When I was just a little child, I remember I was only this big, and she took me to the Continental Baths. Maybe it was my dad, I don't remember.
I feel pretty, oh so pretty. I feel witty and pretty and bright. On the boats and on the planes, they coming to America, never looking back again. They coming to America.
got so much jewelry on. Dame Elizabeth Taylor.
We're going skating on it later.
When you look at the response from the industry that show business as opposed to the response from the industry that is widget making, I think you see that it's a large and appropriate response.
In a world of ethnic cleansing, hate crimes, children killing children, can we really expect compassion from the masses toward people in trouble, people at risk, faceless folks who struggle with physical indignities and try and comprehend what is finally incomprehensible?
When we return, we'll hear from the heart of APLA, their clients. Over the past 20 years, AIDS Project Los Angeles has provided direct services to thousands of men, women, and children living with HIV and AIDS. Today, they serve a record number, over 10,000 active clients.
Went into the hospital on March 28th, 1997, with the flu, only to find out when I came out of the PCP pneumonia coma on April 15th. I had full-blown AIDS.
I was tested positive in fall of 1988. I had assumed that I was positive for several years before that due to circumstances where I knew somebody that I was with was infected and had passed away.
I had suspected that I was HIV positive for quite some time, and I didn't want to be tested because there were a number of years there where I thought if you were told you were positive, it was a death sentence.
I didn't practice safe sex. Safe sex, I'm a product of the 60s. We didn't have safe sex. We had sex.
I did not think this would happen to me. I thought I was one of those kids that knew better. Unfortunately, I didn't. And I made some pretty bad choices that inevitably have brought me to where I'm at being HIV positive.
HIV and AIDS only came if you were gay. That's not so. That's the most biggest farce they've ever put on the planet.
We figured I'd been infected for 10, 11 years. 10, 11 years. I'd been married for 6.
I have 3 children, 6 grandchildren. HIV? Unheard of. But I was ignorant. It can happen to anyone.
I was down to 100 pounds, and I had 4 days where they really didn't think I was going to make it.
Became homeless. Yeah, me and my son used to walk the streets. We did that for about 3 months. And I walked into APLA one day, and they boosted me back up, because I had never been without. I'd never been, but I felt like my life was over.
I couldn't eat, I couldn't swallow, I couldn't talk.
I couldn't dial telephones. I couldn't remember even how to get to the most rudimentary places.
You can't get it by touching me or hugging me.
I have 3 adult children. I had so much pressure from family and friends and every other person I met who said, you must go on the cocktail, you must go on the cocktail. So eventually I decided I'd go on it.
I've used up all of the available drugs. I'm on my last cocktail possible after having even gone off drugs for 9 months because there was nothing that I could take at the time.
I should have known more. I should have known better, and I should have been taking care of myself, and I didn't.
You can't take it back, unfortunately. It's not a thing you can say, oh, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done that, or not done this or that.
HIV does not care who you are, what color you are, what education you had, what state you grew up in. It only cares if you do something risky and let it in, and that's all I did.
When I first found out I would walk down the street and I would just cry. And I'd see people and I think, they're healthy, and I'm not. And they might, and then I could see them come into APLA. Oh, they've got it too.
I was completely alone and the only woman I'd ever met with HIV. So I went to APLA.
Started going to community education forums, nutrition classes, things like that APLA offers, so I could find out as much about the disease I possibly could.
Wonderful treatment from the dental clinic. I've got completely new teeth, both top and bottom, which is courtesy of APLA.
And I came into APLA and everything was open. If you need medication, dental work, food, whatever you needed, they were there to help you.
They helped me to get my will and financial papers together.
It is still a terminal illness. You know that at some point the medication's not going to work. Side effects will set in and basically you get resistant to the drugs, and then they switch you to another group and they work for a little while. And so at some point, you know, you become rather fatalistic.
I don't want anything to happen to me. I don't want my friends to have to go through, you know, any type of grief over something that was so easily avoided.
My opinion is the person most at risk is the person who knows they're not at risk.
It's still a major problem. People aren't dying as quickly, that's all.
It doesn't have an age group. And I'm a real good example of that. I'm 51, and I'm doing fine.
Shortly after these interviews, both Hillary and Clodagh passed away. For AIDS Project Los Angeles, and in fact for all AIDS service organizations, the past 20 years politically have been like a giant chess game. Here's Congressman Henry Waxman.
In the course of trying to figure out what to do about the AIDS epidemic, because we soon found out it was an epidemic, we had to deal with a public that was either complacent because they weren't interested in the subject or frightened. And the atmosphere in Washington was one of an administration under President Reagan where the health people would tell us privately that they knew this was a serious problem, but the official position of the administration was that they didn't want to deal with it. President Reagan wouldn't even pronounce the word AIDS.
There were so many people out there that were labeling HIV, one, a gay disease. Two, of course, we had so many people saying if this kind of sex was not engaged in, there wouldn't be this disease, and people were getting what they deserved.
We had real enemies. Dornan, there's a piece of work.
It was so controversial that it was difficult to get them to agree to fund AIDS research. The President of the United States threatened to veto a bill funding the Department of Health and Human Services because it had too much money for AIDS research in the early 1980s.
The response of the American government early on, especially during the Reagan years, was, I won't even use the words that I would want to use to describe the lack of that response.
I was very disturbed that the Reagan administration felt it was controversial to deal with a major health crisis because the people being affected by it were gay men.
It took many, many, many years to educate the public about AIDS, and for us to even be able to say the word out loud.
Ronald Reagan didn't use the word. People were dying all around him and he wouldn't use the word. And many of his friends were gay.
They didn't want to talk about it because they thought this would be a gay rights issue.
Was this a health care issue? Was this a civil rights issue? And there were plenty of arguments within our own community.
It was one of the few times historically that the gay community has come together, the different ethnicities, classes, collectively to raise the volume of what was needed because of how it was affecting our community.
I think 1 million people are the message today. That's what's really significant here. We're saying that we're here, we're your brothers, we're your sisters, we're your children, and this is what America's all about, an incredible, diverse movement of people.
There were people who wanted to lock up people with AIDS. There were people who wanted to have name reporting and use those names publicly. There were people who fought any attempt to get an anti-discrimination bill through, and there were people being fired because they were HIV positive.
There were people that I felt were not looking to the best interests of our country, that needed to demonize some people to make themselves feel better.
People were fired from their jobs. Their health insurance, if they had any, was canceled immediately.
And I don't know anybody who's been thrown out of their apartment because they had breast cancer. But I can give you a list of 24 people who were thrown out of their apartments because they had AIDS.
Surgeon General Koop, I think, was one of the heroes in dealing with this AIDS epidemic. And once he took on the job of the Surgeon General, I have never known anybody as courageous. And he was reviled by many in the right wing of the Republican Party because he talked about the fact that this was an epidemic and we had to deal with the problem.
You do not get AIDS from non-sexual casual contact, not with inanimate objects, not from pets, not from insects. The only way that AIDS is transmitted is through sexual contact. I talk to an awful lot of teenage kids about French kissing, deep kissing, and I'll tell you what I say to them. I think the chances of your passing the virus from saliva to saliva is very slim, but deep kissing in teenage kids leads to sexual intercourse. That's how you really get AIDS.
Henry Waxman is a true hero in the AIDS epidemic, but there's another hero here in Los Angeles, Representative Maxine Waters, who for the last 10 years has been instrumental in assuring federal funding for this epidemic, particularly in communities of color.
One of the things that I think has been a challenge that certainly happened during my tenure at the White House was the President's 10-year challenge on finding a vaccine and what we needed to do in putting our collective forces and resources together to make that happen.
I must tell you, the women's community really stepped up and did their part. And we started to see more women on our community board organizations across the line, more involvement in politics, and it was phenomenal.
Many assume that the AIDS epidemic is over. And there's this complacency that I fear could lead to less support for groups like AIDS Project LA and other organizations that are on the front lines of fighting the AIDS epidemic, or that people in the government will think there's less for them to do because there's no need anymore to deal with an AIDS crisis here and a huge one overseas.
HIV in the 21st century may be an entirely different entity that is not treatable. If issues are not addressed now comprehensively, we could be in for a terrible surprise.
Most people that you would ask know the rudimentary facts about AIDS now. The level that we've missed is that most of them just don't think it affects them.
Every time you see a figure that says it's a huge disease in Africa, then every racist in America says, well, of course it is. It's a black disease. It's a sexually transmitted disease, and it's difficult to tell people, especially in the right wing, that a virus doesn't know what sex you are, that a virus just goes from one body to another.
The only way we are going to solve the AIDS crisis or cure the AIDS disease or put it into some form of remission is with incredibly extensive research that only the federal government can provide.
I have been so grateful over the years to see the way APLA has worked in the midst of the crisis and been able to expand and roll with the times as the crisis changed.
As AIDS has changed over the course of the last 20 years, so has APLA. We're always changing in response to the epidemic to help our clients. So long as AIDS is around, APLA will be around.
Your government appropriated for AIDS research, care, and prevention $6,384,000,000. That's a lot of money.
Over the last 20 years, it's gone from, we don't want to know you, we don't want to know about this, to we're a part of you and you're a part of us.
And it didn't matter whether it was a Democratic-controlled Congress or a Republican-controlled Congress. We had a disease out there, and for all the bigotry, people still came together and said, we got to cure this thing.
It's obvious that the efforts in Washington are just as important now, if not more so, than they've always been. Or I'm afraid it's going to drop off the radar, and we've got to keep it front and center.
Jaded, donor fatigue, disease of the moment, red ribbons, pink ribbons, blue ribbons. so totally burned out at being mad. Just because we hope and wish and think and pray for something to be gone doesn't mean it really disappears.
Heroes, 20 years with AIDS Project Los Angeles, will return. Welcome back to Heroes, 20 years with AIDS Project Los Angeles.
I'm Pat Harvey from KCAL 9.
And I'm Ken Schocknick from CBS 2. We've already heard from Jeffrey Katzenberg, Bruce Vilanch, and others about how early on Hollywood responded to the AIDS crisis.
That support has not only come from individuals, but from the studios themselves.
Over the last 20 years, without the entertainment industry, especially in Los Angeles, our agency would never have become anything like what it's become.
That could not have ever happened probably in any other part of the United States.
Thank God it's a liberal group, and we weren't shunned by that industry as we were by so many other industries.
9 years ago, Jonathan Demme saw to it that his movie, Philadelphia, starring Tom Hanks, had its world premiere as a benefit for AIDS Project Los Angeles.
And until September 11th, for 16 years, Paramount Pictures played host to APLA's AIDS Walk.
I forget how many people showed up, but it was far more than any of us had ever predicted. And it became an annual thing. It was the start of the AIDS Walk. It was the first AIDS Walk. And it was such a phenomenal success. And we made so much money. Because it's so large, and because it involves so many people, and because it gets so much publicity, it reminds people of the disease. It educates people about the disease. It gives us a chance to talk to people.
70% of our funding comes from private sources. I think that tells you it's pretty darn important.
The sustaining funds for the organization have come from smaller gifts. Interestingly, a majority of those gifts have been from women, and the range is generally around $100.
Dance-a-thons, fashion shows. You can go on and on and on and on. It never stopped. Lots and lots of other things, almost all of which were put on by volunteers. Volunteers spent countless hours putting this together, and every year there was more events, had to be. And every year there were more solicitations, and every year we were begging more people. And it had to, because the number of people who were contracting this disease was rising and rising and rising. And with each new discovery, they were living longer, and they needed help.
No studio has been more supportive than Universal.
Back in the days of Lew Wasserman, Universal Studios was host to an event targeted at youth, Dance-a-thon. Summer parties on the back lot for 5,000, and the legendary Commitment to Life.
David Geffen understood what we all were going to be responsible for as a community in terms of taking care of our own. And so David, with extraordinary leadership and zero fanfare, you know, came forward early, strong, loud.
I did not know Barry Diller and David Geffen, but I knew they had money, and I knew they had been generous in other things. And we sat down to dinner. After they peppered me with questions, and after they got the answers, not before, they started writing checks. Barry Diller took a tour of APLA, and he was more than impressed, and he turned to the leader of the food bank. He says, "What do you need?" And she said, "We need a van." 2 days later, the van arrived. It was quite impressive. He stuck with us, and so did David Geffen. They stuck with us through years and years and years, through crisis after crisis, and I knew where to turn.
Here's Universal's former president and chief operating officer, Sid Sheinberg.
I think we have always been at the forefront of what I would characterize as gay rights issues. And although clearly AIDS has proven not to be a disease limited to gay people, that's certainly the way the world began to first learn of it. Hollywood often responds better than most people think they will. Most people in Hollywood are good people. I think Hollywood identified with it more than other communities where fewer gay people were actually out when APLA, in support of APLA, came up, I mean, it really was no issue. It was certainly something we would want to get behind, and we did get behind it.
This is my 10th year for AIDS Walk. I walk anyway. That's my exercise. So I thought I'm going to start sending out a few faxes to see if I can generate some sponsors. And I was amazed to see the people who responded. And I have a huge number of people who call me in July if they haven't received my faxes. Are you walking? Where's your fax? Because of our industry, maybe we are more in the forefront, and even though it's 20 years and there are other causes that need our time, our energy, and our money, this disease is still killing people, and we have to keep walking and raising money.
One thing that I showed Cynthia very, very early on is not taking no for an answer. You know, she's very passionate about APLA and AIDS Walk, and really, you know, has accepted the challenge every year of showing leadership. And unfortunately, for those who call my office, there's a toll. And that toll is APLA, and I'm all for it.
At this year's AIDS Walk, Cynthia Park raised over $65,000 for APLA, bringing her remarkable lifetime AIDS Walk total to over $515,000.
You think what you don't know can't hurt you? 40,000 Americans are infected every year, and 2 people between the ages of 13 and 21 are infected every hour of every day. What you don't know can hurt you. Knowledge is power. Protect yourself.
Heroes, 20 Years with AIDS Project Los Angeles will return. Heroes, 20 Years with AIDS Project Los Angeles.
People that think that AIDS is over are really putting their heads in the sand. It's wishful thinking. And I hear that even from people that have AIDS. They have no idea that people are failing on the drugs. They think that everybody's doing well. They think that everybody's going back to work. They think that nobody is getting infected.
Because of some of the progress, some of the younger generation are now not taking it seriously again. And this is a disease you have to take very seriously.
After an exposure to HIV, it can be 10 years, it can be a long period of time. So you're talking about any number of thousands or tens of thousands of 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds or 15-year-olds walking around with HIV and not knowing it and not suspecting it and transmitting it. Now, if that entire group of people, that generation, isn't seeing it around them, it's not relevant to them. They don't see it as relevant. They see it as, quote unquote, an old man's disease. They see it as a poor person's disease. They see it as an ethnic disease. They don't see it pertaining to themselves.
We've all been young with raging hormones. But they need to get the word that it's still there. They need to know that there isn't a cure, that the medicines will help them live for a while, but that their life will change. I don't know. That's where I do get discouraged, because I think until something hits people directly.
It's almost a certainty that someone you know is living with HIV or AIDS. You may not know it, they may not even know it, but they may be the one who will not respond to therapy. They may be the one who has been infected with drug-resistant virus.
If we could turn back the clock and show people what it was like in 1988, 89, 1990, what the streets were like, what the town was like, what it was like to go to San Francisco or to go to New York and see the streets empty, except for, you know, emaciated, decrepit bodies creeping up and down the streets. We don't see that now, but there are people that are tucked away in their homes because they're ashamed to go out.
I worry about the sense that maybe there's nothing to worry about anymore, that AIDS is something we used to have, and that as a consequence, a lot of people will let down their guard and contract the disease that might otherwise have prevented it from happening.
There is no cure, and the medications are not going to cure. And we still have to live with the cruel, harsh facts that AIDS does kill.
We talk about things like needle exchange, we talk about funding, and we talk about education. And these are the same topics we were talking about in the 1980s. So yes, things have improved, and yes, we still have a long way to go.
I don't feel great optimism now, but I'm sure not ready to throw the towel in. And I think somewhere, all of us are going to find a way to do it.
Hopefully there'll be some scientist somewhere around that will persevere and find a cure eventually. But none of us know the full impact of these very toxic drugs that we take that are keeping us alive at the moment. None of us know the long-term effects of them.
One of my biggest personal accomplishments, honestly, was getting the courage to go through my son's lives with them and be there with them when they died. And to have them trust me enough to share with me their fears.
Through all the loss and the despair and the frustration, there's still been a great deal of good that has come out of this.
We all tend to think things are too big or they're beyond us and that the little bit we do doesn't make a difference. Well, we are all that one little pebble that gets thrown in and the circles do spread.
Knowing that we're at least moving these, steps, however small they may be, but at least that we're moving in the right direction. That is what keeps me going.
I love being that guy that's at the front line saying, hey, I was right where you're at just a couple of years ago. And you can look up, you can look down the road. It isn't going to go away. It isn't going to do away with you now or tomorrow, in the near future perhaps. But medicine is getting better and better as the years go by, so we don't know that for certain.
The only thing I can see in my future now is to teach and make people as aware and not afraid of AIDS as I can. Because I have found out, even in your own family, AIDS is a taboo thing. If you want to know how many friends you have, tell them you have AIDS. Everybody's afraid of you.
A farmer's wife from Kansas. Her husband had been here. He had to go home. The son died while he was back home. And we stayed in touch, and they didn't know whether to let people know or not, and I urged them to get the support of their church, and they put a notice in the newsletter, and people came pouring forth. It's people like that who were the real heroes. They have changed my life.
My grandparents, well into their 80s, grow melancholy thinking of lifelong friends that have died. At 34, I know how they feel. And that says it all. That says it all.
I'm Don Corsini, President and General Manager of CBS 2 and KCAL 9. All of us in the Viacom family are committed to stopping the spread of HIV and AIDS. We are proud to be airing this special to commemorate APLA's 20th anniversary. For more information, to volunteer or to make a donation, go to www.apla.org. Once again, here's Tom Hanks.
In our world, heroes come in many forms. We've met some of them here tonight. AIDS Project Los Angeles is just one of many AIDS service organizations here in Southern California, and they all need your support. AIDS is not over, far from it. But over the past 20 years, hundreds of thousands of caring people have risen up and committed great deeds of courage, and I'm certain they will be there, if needed, over the next 20 years.
All alone I came into this world. All alone I will someday die. solid stone is just sand and water, baby. Sand and water, and a million years gone by. I will see you in the light of 1,000 suns. I will hear you in the sound of the waves. I will know you when I come, as we all will come, through the doors beyond the grave.